Awesome.
A moment of freedom. But the exoneration of Clarence Woodhouse, Alan Woodhouse, and Brian Anderson has raised a crucial question. Who killed Ting Fong Chan? He was a chef at Winnipeg's Beachcomber restaurant in 1973 and a father of 2. Lawyer James Lockyer advocates for the wrongfully convicted with Innocence Canada. He says it can be difficult to find the real killer after so long.
To say the trail is cold is to it doesn't quite get to it.
He points to the case of David Milgaard. He was exonerated after DNA evidence identified the true culprit nearly 30 years later. James Lockyer thinks it's unlikely there's DNA evidence in Chan's murder, but he says police do have something else: the names of other people identified as suspects at the time.
Because any other suspects that they identified back in 1973, they discounted because they had decided who had done the crime.
Retired Detective Andrew Mikołajewski saw that when he reviewed the 1981 killing of 16-year-old Barbara Stoppel, after Thomas Sofino was wrongfully convicted. There were missing notes and even evidence.
And that may be some of the disappointment that investigators in this case find.
It's been over 50 years since Chan was killed, so whoever did it could be dead. Lockyer says it's still worth trying to find who's responsible.
There's a societal interest in it too. And there's nothing Brian Anderson, Alan Woodhouse, and Clarence Woodhouse would like more.
Lockyer says Chan's family deserves to know too. Winnipeg police are reviewing the case but declined to comment. Caitlin Gowerluck, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And this is the one that's the issue? And you're using that one for reference? Yeah. Okay. This is my 10th year teaching at the Louisville Arts and Technology Center, and I went into industry. I did complete my Red Seal before going into education and getting my vocab to teach. But it's all mushrooms, so it's not going to pull through. We still have a majority of male students, but we have more and more female students enrolling and actually pursuing it as a career afterward, which is really encouraging. I've been out of the field for a while. I mean, I did start my apprenticeship journey over 20 years ago. So a lot has changed. It definitely required some resiliency, and definitely there was some adversity to overcome.
When I got accepted to come into ATC, I had no idea that there was going to be a woman teacher, but when I did find out, it did feel great, because knowing that there was going to be somebody else there that understands what it's like being a woman in the industry.
There's been a really positive change in industry, and it's becoming more mainstream, more accepting to see females in those roles. It's important just to have representation for any marginalized group, but especially having women in trades, I think that's just opening up doors for more talent. You can get just a bolt kit for that flange. I've never had anyone guess my profession or my career. So yeah, there's definitely students will come in and maybe they weren't expecting maybe what they get. But it's only a matter of a really short time before you build a rapport with students. You know what you did?
What?
Really well on your tests.
Really?
Yes. They start to see that, hey, you're an expert in your field. And so you can quickly gain some respect. I think it's really important that we start to shift our focus from maybe what we expect people to look like in certain professions, and maybe shift the focus more to people's abilities and their skill sets.
Yeah!
There you go, man. Go for it. What I try to do is just inspire all my students. Success! The ball joint's now officially out of the knuckle.
Yeah!
Whether they're coming from a marginalized group or whether they're, male, female. What I see is students really just benefit from seeing success stories and seeing diversity. And I think that hopefully, that all students are taking something from that.
She's helped me so much to learn and to be a successful mechanic, and for that, she's a great educator. Not any teacher can do that and can teach anyone. It takes a truly great educator to teach someone the right way, even when they struggle.
I feel so privileged to be teaching automotive, but it's exceptionally special just being a woman and being in my position to deliver that. It's just that much more impactful, I hope, and just helping to like change that, you know, sort of idea of what a particular profession looks like. Full resistance. Nice.
Just wondering.
Okay.
150 Winnipeggers are being awarded for their contributions in their community, all part of commemorating the city's 150th anniversary. Felicia Adams spoke to one of the awardees.
So this is the second oldest bridge in all of Winnipeg.
Jim Smith did not imagine being awarded by the city for sharing his passion for history.
Totally surprised. I just couldn't believe it.
Smith is the creator of the Northeast Winnipeg Historical Society. The group looks to record and preserve the history of the area, like the Louise Bridge. Would this be sort of the original bridge?
That's the way it would have looked. I guess they have the sailboat, back from this is a drawing from like the, 1890s, early 1900s. That's the way it would have looked, yes.
And so this would be all wood at the bottom there?
The base of it where the tracks were, that was all a wooden base rather than concrete. Like now it's concrete and that, but no, it was all wood.
The awards celebrate the city's 150th anniversary. The 150 recipients were nominated by people who think they've made an impact. Along with a medal, a tree will also be planted in their name. Among the recipients are Elder Barbara Nipinak, Scott Oak, and Desiree Scott. The mayor, Scott Gillingham, says those who are receiving an award are leaders in their community.
These are people who are, a lot of times are not paid for the work that they do. These are people who give back to the community in a variety of ways.
The Northeast Winnipeg Historical Society was created 16 years ago and since then has gained thousands in followers. Its creation stemming from a lack of information specific to the area.
I decided I would do my own research. If I wanted to know more, then we're going to City Winnipeg archives, old newspapers, and just finding out the stuff myself, which I've published, which I've printed online.
Smith's work attempts to preserve stories that would otherwise be forgotten, like the old East Kildonan City Hall, constructed in 1951, which became a senior center, and this home on Winterton Avenue, built in 1902, where the mayor and the council of East Kildonan once sat.
I look upon, if I'm going to be remembered after I'm gone, or people know of me, it's because of my history work.
Getting recognized for that work adds another chapter to the story. Felicia Adam, CBC News, Winnipeg.
This is it. This is the line that separates Canada from the United States. For years, illegal crossings have been a big problem here. The U.S. Border Patrol and RCMP taking a rare step in talking about surveillance and the equipment they're using, showing off equipment like this scope truck that can see up to 16 kilometers, along with boats, drones, snowmobiles, an attempt to deter people who want to cross illegally.
Our goal as for the integrated border enforcement side in the RCMP is to make sure we want to know who's coming into Canada, what threat they may pose.
In 2022, the Patel family, a young family of 4 from India, froze to death trying to cross from Manitoba into Minnesota. In 2016, 2 other men lost their fingers and nearly froze to death trying to cross from the U.S. into Canada. Now, crossings here spiked in 2018 when then President Trump spoke widely about deporting illegal immigrants. Rhetoric that has returned to U.S. politics with an election booming, both candidates talking about cracking down on illegal immigration.
We have a job today, and we're going to enforce the law at the border. We're going to enforce border security.
Now, it's not clear whether politics will drive another surge of migrants here, but there are smuggling rings active on both sides of the border with people crossing both ways. The message here, there are eyes on this line. Still, crossing it illegally can be deadly. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, on the Canada-US border at Emerson, Manitoba.
Andrew Marquis is best known as the developer of the Parker lands in Winnipeg. Between 2020 and 2023, he worked as a consultant and advisor for Peguis First Nation, working on a debt repayment plan, consulting on housing shortages related to flooding, and using treaty land entitlement funds to purchase real estate assets. In a statement of claim filed on September 27th, Peguis alleges Marquis, companies he controls, and a company owned by his wife failed to act in the best interests of the band and benefited financially from breaches of duty. In the claim, Peguis alleges Marquis has consistently misused his power and discretion as a fiduciary to enrich himself to the detriment of Peguis. According to the claim, Marquis had the Peguis First Nation Real Estate Trust purchase this former golf course in East St. Paul because he was interested in developing it into housing, according to the claim. Peguis claims Marquis directed the real estate trust to agree to a $5.5 million loan from a company owned by Marquis's wife. That loan now has an interest rate of 9.2%, according to the claim. Peguis also claims Marquis directed the real estate trust to buy and sell this vacant land along Wellington Crescent in Winnipeg. According to the claim, the province sold this land to Peguis on the basis it would be added to its reserve lands. Peguis claims a subsequent sale to a private developer breached the terms of the purchase and the treaty land entitlement agreement. In the claim, Peguis alleges Marquis had the ability to unilaterally exercise his power and discretion in a manner that affected Peguis's legal, economic, and practical interests. Peguis was vulnerable to and at the mercy of Marquis's exercises of discretion and power. In a statement, Marquis called the claim baseless, without merit, and legally flawed. The notion that I, or anyone else for that matter, had total control of all of Peguis's financial, legal, and other matters is pure fiction. Marquis called the claim an attempt by Peguis to distract from its inability to resolve a $172 million lawsuit from a receiver for a former lender and a federal court challenge of its 2023 election launched by former Chief Glenn Hudson against current Chief Stan Bird.
None of the allegations made by Peguis have been proven in court. No statement of defense has been filed. Marquis says he will immediately move towards striking the claims. Bart Lekivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, it is time for our monthly interview with Mayor Scott Gillingham, who is in studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Marcy.
So let's start actually with something in the news this morning. I know you did respond to this yesterday, but this new provincial legislation that's going to make it tougher to overrule city land use decisions. So for the sake of our listeners who might have missed the story, what it basically means is if you want to trigger a hearing about something that's being developed, you before needed 25 signatures in the city of Winnipeg, that is, and now that increases to 300 signatures. I know that you've commented that this could speed up developments that are important developments and housing developments in some cases as well. Is that the main reason why you're applauding this?
I am. Currently, before this legislation, yes, 25 signatures was all that was needed to take a decision that council had made to take that to the municipal board. That's a very low threshold. And so there were many projects that council had approved that the public, through 25 signatures, took to the municipal board. What that did is it really slowed things down because the municipal board then has this lineup of hearings and appeals that they need to hear. And in the meantime, we need development to happen. We need more housing. And so this is a good decision, I believe, by the province of Manitoba, and I really support them changing the threshold from 25 to 300 signatures. So the public will still have the opportunity to appeal. They just need 300 signatures to get something to the municipal board instead of 25.
Of course, there's multiple perspectives on this. So to look at it from the other point of view, there may be someone listening saying, but in my block of Winnipeg, this development's going to affect me and my neighbors. There are 25 of us. So they may feel it's unfair, that they need 300 signatures. Now they may be thinking, now what do I do? Do I have to campaign sort of street to street to street if I have a concern about something? What would you say to that concern?
In some cases, yes, people are going to need to go further to get more signatures. But for example, when I was a city councillor in my last term, there was a project with about 150 to close to 200 units that were proposed. I believed it was a very good project. That project was overturned by the municipal board, and it was 25, 30 people that overturned that project. And at the time, there was no requirement for those people to live in the area either. And so there's still an appeal process. Things can still go to the municipal board. It just takes more signatures to get there.
I want to read you something here. This is on another story. This is a quote. The quote is, a working group is set to start as early as next month to plan to move rail lines out of the city of Winnipeg. The group, which will include Canadian Pacific Railway and Canadian national officials, will put together a detailed study to submit to federal officials, as is required under federal transport laws. End quote. That was from one of our CBC reports 10 years ago. This is something we've been studying since the 60s. I wonder why you support studying relocation of the rail yards at Henry and Higgins, which was announced this week yet again. And I think my point with that is we have all of this data already. If this is something that's desired, should we not be at a different point in the process?
You would think so. And that's a fair point because you're right, Marcy. Rail relocation in Winnipeg has been studied many times and for years. What we need now, though, is we need current information. We need current costs. We need also to understand the impact on jobs, the impact on rail operations. But I'm really hoping what can happen with this study is that we could look at some incremental steps, some of what it may be possible in the short term. For example, in the Winnipeg's north end, there's a rail line that runs 9 kilometers. It crosses. There's 30 crossings in residential streets, and it's only the city of Winnipeg is the only one that uses it. And so, is that a possibility? Can we look at some of these spur lines that are underutilized, or lines that are not well used? Can we start there? Can those be transformed into places where housing or active transportation pathways could be put in place? So we're really looking at what is the art of the possible here and what could be done, and can we look at some incremental steps?
Have we looked before? I know in the past when we've reported on this, and we've looked at it in totality because you're talking about needing multiple layers of approvals. There's remediation of the land afterward. There's funding agreements. But have we looked before at what you're talking about at sort of could we start smaller to get things moving more quickly to free up some of the land?
I don't know the answer to that. That obviously is a good question. I don't know whether we have or not. I know that Dr. Axworthy's study will take at least 2 years. I think it'll be a comprehensive study. Looking forward to that. But as I said, I'm hoping that within that study, there are opportunities for incremental steps where we could start small.
Does this discussion about the rail yards coming up again and the study coming up again signal that there's no future for the Arlington Bridge?
No, because as I said, Dr. Axworthy's study is going to take at least 2 years. And then if it did say move forward and let's say, the federal government and the provincial government and the rail companies all wanted to move the yards, in the north end, that would take years and years and years. You mentioned remediation would be one of the things that would have to be done. So council is going to have to make a decision on the Arlington Bridge, sooner than 2 to 3 years from now. So those really at this point are not connected.
Same area, of course, and the Arlington connects north and south. So natural question flowing out of it. When do you expect we'll have an answer on Arlington? Because I think it was February where we were hoping to have an answer to how much it would cost and what the next steps are. And it remains closed. Is it closed another winter then, I guess?
It will be closed another winter. We should, as a council, be getting the information we've been looking for within the next few months here on the Arlington Bridge report.
I want to move to some concerns about Winnipeg's West End neighborhood, actually. We have a clip to play for you here. This is around Arlington and Ellis specifically. CBC reported this week in that immediate area, 3 businesses recently closed. Have a listen to what one area resident told our reporter Jim Agapito about it.
Andre Crate.
Can you tell me what you do in the area?
So I do work at a community center in the area, and I'm part of the employment program. So we help people find employment. We have community drop-in. We give out harm reduction. We have a really good greening team, housing grant team, everything like that. So.
You look at the 3 businesses around Arlington and Ellis. They've all closed. How is that impacting the area?
It's kind of making it look like a very desolate area. Like 7-Eleven was a lot of business for people. So I think it's making people a little bit more withdrawn and kind of recluse. Doesn't really aesthetically pleasing for the neighborhood. It kind of looks run down and not taken care of. I've lived here for 17 years, so I think it's just nice to have businesses in the West End, employ people, have that opportunity to keep the neighborhood thriving.
So you can hear a story like this, and these might seem like small closures, but of course we know there's other 7-Eleven stores that are closing in Winnipeg. We had a list of actually businesses yesterday on the air that were closing, some of those due to retail crime specifically. But what are you most worried about regarding the situation plaguing many of our neighborhoods? And when you hear a resident saying it, makes you feel bad about where you live.
Yeah, no, I feel for that resident and any resident who's living in areas that are being described here, because when you lose a business in an area, it is a loss to the community, without a doubt. But, one of the things that I would mention as well is the retail crime initiative that has been launched, where we have the police working through provincial funding, has been showing progress. It has made a difference. You talk to retail, merchants and outlets, they appreciate the difference it has made. In fact, the Retail Council of Canada locally is using Winnipeg's model right now all across Canada and is touting it as something that is working. Sometimes it's not working fast enough, as in the case probably that the clip we just played. I know, but I talked, for example, to Munters Eid not that long ago, within the last couple of weeks, and he talked about the difference, the positive difference.
Grocery store
initiative,
owner,
grocery store owner. Thank you. Yeah, a food fair. It's made a positive difference in his community. But 7-Eleven specifically, you'd have to talk to 7-Eleven as to the reasons, all the reasons that they may be closing their stores. I note that for sure it could be theft. I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah.
I do note that 7-Eleven, I think, is closing 400 stores across North America right now as well, though.
Can we do something to strengthen initiatives, or what can the city do to help smaller businesses? That may be going through closures or having challenge specifically. Yesterday on the Retail Theft Initiative, we crunched the numbers for City of Winnipeg Police coming out to businesses and companies. And it was really noticeable that some larger groups, like Superstore was the example, can afford the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they have to spend on security and having a police officer there. Some smaller, mom and pop shops that are critical to these neighborhoods like we're hearing about, they can't afford that. So what initiatives could we put in place at that level to help those businesses stay safe and stay open?
Well, first of all, the Retail Crime Initiative is only temporary. I'd like to see it extended. I'd like to see it made permanent. The key to that is going to be, frankly, a new funding model for the City of Winnipeg from the province of Manitoba, because as a City of Winnipeg, we can and we should be taking policing on ourselves. Right now, the province is funding overtime for this Retail Crime Initiative, and it's overtime for police, but it's temporary. We need to make it permanent so that the smaller stores you're talking about that can't afford to hire special duty officers get police and get to foot patrol in their community. And the foot patrol, which is part of the Retail Crime Initiative, has been very, very important.
It's like Osborne Village got.
Osborne Village, the downtown, it's made a big difference as well, because those officers have the opportunity to build relationship with those store owners. So I'd like to see it made permanent, but to do that, I think it's really about a new funding model with the province of Manitoba for the City of Winnipeg.
I have a story out of the news I want to ask you about, and then a quick snapper. So let's do the snapper first. How close are we to announcing the new police chief?
Getting closer. I'm on the police board, and we're through. We're into the interview process. We'll be starting that pretty soon. But as a police, as mayor, I want to see a police chief who is a great collaborator with the province and tackle some of these issues like retail crime.
This month? Next month? Do you think?
I don't have a timeline on it. Yeah.
Okay. The issue in the news is the Winnipeg landlord that is talking about the reconsideration of the city around these fines, although they're still going up. If you own a property that has the firefighters have had to come out to and fight. Why is it fair if a landlord has proven and shown steps that they have boarded up to try to protect their property that they should have to foot the bill for fire coming out?
There are some property owners who are doing work. On their vacant and derelict buildings, but there are some, frankly, that have been sitting on vacant derelict buildings for a long time, and that's neighborhood blight. We need a combination of incentivizing those property owners to get their properties done, but then we also need to have penalties because those areas, those properties that continually are targeted for fire, that's a risk to the firefighters, it's a risk to the community, it's neighborhood blight. So we need a combination of that. A positive incentive, make it easier for people to develop. But on the other hand, when they just sit on their property and it's boarded up for months, years on end in some cases, and there's fires, I still believe we need penalties on those fires, because there's a cost to the city of Winnipeg. And final comment is this: if I own a piece of property and I have it boarded up for years on end, it shouldn't be fair, Marcy, that you as a taxpayer have to keep paying for the firefighters to show up and fight the fire at my property because I'm doing nothing with it.
You dressing up for Halloween this year?
I am not, but I will be handing out candy.
What are you going to hand out?
We hand out.
Do they know when they come to your house? Do they we're at the mayor's house? Do they know that?
Some of the neighbors do, I think, but some they're kids. They just want the candy. They don't. I don't think they care if it's the mayor or anyone else. But yeah, we look forward to it.
I cut you off there. What are you handing out?
Chocolate bars.
Chocolate, yeah. We'll have to see this year. My street has changed, so I think I've got more kids in the street we'll have to hand out as well. Thank you for being here. We'll talk to you next month.
Thank you.
Of course, we'll hear from the mayor before then, but our regular monthly interview will be coming up next month. Scott Gillingham has been in studio with us live on CBC. And I want to start with the Skibitsky sentence.
Yeah.
With so much at stake in delivering that sentence, what was going through your mind?
Well, first of all, I can't get into too much detail about the trial itself, but I'm happy to talk about the surrounding circumstances. I'll talk about Skibitsky insofar as it was what I think characterized before as a bit of a metaphor for all of the horrors and the phenomena that was touched upon in the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry. So it was clearly the focus of many people. We were dealing obviously first and foremost with a criminal trial, and I'll get to the sentencing in a second, that needed to provide for the accused person due process. That's the first and foremost obligation and rule of a judge and a jury and all court participants. So we did that, and hopefully we did it successfully. But also, a trial doesn't have to just be fair. It has to be fair, but it also has to be respectful. Fair and respectful both to the accused person, but also to family, to friends, and to the broader community. Now, who's the community in this instance? Well, it's obviously the Indigenous community who were highly and acutely engaged, but so too was it the broader Manitoba community who was, I think, deeply, profoundly affected by this case. So when it came to the sentencing, there was obviously a need, in my view, and the need of all the participants, including the Crown and including Defense Counsel. I want to give Defense Counsel their due as well. They were very willing to collaborate with all the court participants to ensure that the process of the sentencing, like the process of the trial itself, was validated or legitimated in a way that made the broader public, including the Indigenous community, feel, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that we were trying to integrate, absorb some of the Indigenous legal practices, traditions, and symbols that had meaning for them. So what was going through my mind wasn't simply the act of imposing what I had to do as the sentence, which was largely predetermined by law, but it was also to legitimate a process for the broader public that needs to trust our system. And I was thinking a lot about that, as I know both parties, the accused and the Crown, was.
So I want to ask you more about that balance, because obviously in that case, many in the Indigenous community and in Manitoba overall, thank you for your language, for your message, in how you handled the sentence, the words you chose. Now on the other side of things, and there was the acquittal of Robert Jeffrey Morden this year in the death of Headingley and William Walter Amo. Now following that, the now late AMC chief Kathy Merrick called this, quote, a gross miscarriage of justice that perpetuates systemic racism and, quote, contravenes the basic principles of our basic human rights, safety, justice, and equity for First Nations people under the law. How do you achieve the goals of reconciliation in the justice system, as you were just talking about, which is supposed to be impartial? How do you do both things in a province where you see the community reacting and leaning in on every verdict in such a way?
Well, I had nothing but profound respect for Grand Chief Merrick, but I don't want to talk about her characterization or her assessment of that case. That would be inappropriate for me to do. So I don't want my answer and my silence about that case to be seen in any way as an endorsement of that view. The system itself is flawed, and we're going to make mistakes. And I've recently presided in cases where miscarriages of justice were identified, appropriate apologies and comments were made. But those were cases that were identified as that. We have to be careful, and I'm not suggesting Grand Chief Merrick was anything but careful, because she was a passionate and deeply engaged woman. But we have to be careful about not simply taking a verdict that we're not happy with and dissecting it as necessarily a miscarriage of justice. Such cases exist, such cases will continue to exist, hopefully minimally, and we can chat about that if you want. But if we're talking about more broadly speaking, and I think this is what I take your question to be about, because this is really what I think it should be about, insofar as my capacity to answer it, is about systemic trust. What do we do to gain the trust of Indigenous leaders?
And keep the trust.
Yes.
Because of course what we're talking about here is if there is sort of a
push-pull.
A push-pull at every verdict.
Yes.
How do we overall maintain that trust throughout?
Well, the push-pull is always going to exist, because we do have a responsibility in our system of justice to ensure that accused persons, if we're talking about the criminal realm, but we can talk about any area of realm, to provide a fair trial. And what is a fair trial? It means ensuring that due process is properly afforded to everybody. But I like the phrase fair and respectful trial, because fair and respectful doesn't just involve something being fair and respectful to the accused, but it has to, obviously, but it also involves a degree of respect and what I'll call this new phenomenon, this trauma-informed approach for victims and families and for the broader community. If we can do that and go beyond a simple assessment about the verdict or the result, I think we will be doing our job to legitimate the process that we offer up. But I think it takes more than that. I don't want a situation, Marcy, where our level of trust as it's being assessed by any one community is dependent upon the result in a given case. Otherwise, we're effectively no better and no worse than what we're doing to obtain or not obtain the approval of a given community.
So if not that, what do you need to change in the system to achieve that level of trust?
Well, we have to ensure the process is credible, that the process is something that communities, including the Indigenous community, can endorse. They have to feel, to the extent in the criminal realm, for example, because we could get into some of the areas that they're now themselves going to be, I think, adjudicating and taking control over. But if we're talking about the criminal realm, to the extent that we're dealing with perhaps a disproportionate number of Indigenous participants, we have to make them feel like they're part of it, that we're engaging with them and we're incorporating, integrating, and otherwise understanding legal traditions. So Skibiki is an example of what, and we have to be humble about it, what we attempted to do, but we want to normalize that. So back to your original question, what can we do? Well, we as an institution can, and I think have done a great deal. It's not enough, but we're starting. We have in the Court of King's Bench a committee called the Trust, Reconciliation and Access to Justice Committee, TRAC for short. I announced this, I think, in 2017 at the call to the bar. One of the first courts in the country to do this, and it really does act upon the calls to action of then Senator Murray Sinclair. It's based on 4 pillars. The first pillar speaks to the very issue that you're, I think, getting at, the question of trust. We do outreach, not the type of outreach we would typically do with schools or the grand public in terms of explaining people how we do what we do, why we do it, and we're instead there to listen. We're not there to kind of pontificate about how good we are, how magical our system is. We're there to listen to Indigenous Manitobans and hear what they have to say about the justice system.
The Manitoba PCs have been without a permanent leader since former Premier Heather Stephenson stepped down. MLA Wayne Owasco is interim leader while a race to replace Stephenson's underway. The window to enter that race is closed. Brad Zander chairs the PC Leadership Election Committee.
The deadline for filing an application passed today at noon, October 15th. At that time, we had 2 completed application packages.
Fort White MLA Abhi Khan got his application in on October 2nd. He's been approved as a candidate. Churchill hotelier Wally Doddridge also applied, but will have to wait to be approved. He got his application in on Thanksgiving Monday, a day before the deadline. He still has to sit for an interview and undergo a background check and social media screening. Political scientist Christopher Adams says he expected more competition in this race. He suspects the popularity of the NDP government may be to blame.
It looks like it's going to be a 2-term government, so anybody who runs for opposition has to give up his or her position and what their career is and expect to be on the opposition benches for 7 or 8 years.
Brad Zander says that isn't set in stone.
It's the view of all PC party members that the individual who ultimately is successful in this race will be the next premier of Manitoba.
Assuming both Khan and Doddridge are approved as candidates, the election will take place on April 25th. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A warning to our listeners, the details in this story are disturbing. In a few weeks, one of the Winnipeggers accused of torturing and killing 10 cats will be back in court. Chad Cabez and his partner Irene Lima were arrested earlier this month and are facing numerous animal cruelty charges. Police allege the 2 sold videos on the dark web that showed one of them crushing cats and kittens with their feet. As we await more details of the case, folks are wondering what could push someone to harm an animal. We've reached Amy Fitzgerald. She teaches criminology at the University of Windsor and specializes in animal abuse. And Amy joins us by Zoom. Welcome to the program. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
This case was a shock to many Winnipeggers. When you heard about this, what came to mind for you first?
Well, unfortunately, this is one of several cases of crush videos that I'm aware of. So, unfortunately, it's something that that does take place. But I can understand people, being certainly distraught by the news of what took place.
Can you contextualize this for us? And we should also mention that none of the allegations have been proven in court. But what these folks are accused of doing, I mean, just how common are these sorts of charges?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to know because, unfortunately, we don't do a particularly good job in the country of tracking animal abuse cases. So we don't have very good data to rely on. And that's certainly an issue. And it's compounded by the fact that animal maltreatment cases tend to be grossly underreported as well. So it's hard to know how many cases like this have taken place within the country.
So hard to have pure data or reliable data. But you do have a sense of why someone might harm animals in this way. What does the research show about what might drive someone to do this?
Well, there are a number of potential factors. So for some, it's related to their own individual gratification. For others, it's related to a desire to exert power and control over another, a vulnerable being. And of course, animals are fairly accessible. So that can also be a contributing factor. There, in many areas in the country, there is an overpopulation of unwanted cats. So it's not hard for individuals to get access to cats. There's also research that points to animal maltreatment as being part of coercion. So some individuals are coerced into committing cases of animal maltreatment. So there can be a number of factors that come into play in individual cases.
What about age? Does it is there anything in the research that suggests a difference between how an adult might or the intent or the driving force behind how an adult might be doing this, or why an adult might be doing this versus why a child might be doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of the research has focused on adolescents and has found that it's referred to by some as dirty play. So for some adolescents, they engage in harming animals as a form of, experimentation, but they don't go on to commit other crimes. But the research that has been conducted on older individuals does indicate that the motivation can be different, and the age, if it persists across the life course, that can be indicative of more severity, I'll say, than among young adolescents who are doing it as a form of experimentation and socialization with a friend group.
Amy, the RCMP has said this is the worst case of animal cruelty it's dealt with, and has also expressed concern about folks involved in crimes against animals because there might be a connection between violent behavior escalating and involving humans. Is there a link between animal cruelty and empathy?
Well, the research, there's been quite a bit of research within the past few years, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. So it does appear that empathy or a lack of empathy, can come into play. But the research is indicating that the relationship between animal maltreatment and human violence is more nuanced than we tend to think. Or that's displayed, in movies and things like that. So there might not be a neat linear progression from harming animals to harming people, but one might begin by harming people that they're unfamiliar with, and then escalate to harming their own pets, then to people. So it's not necessarily a linear progression, but a lot of the research is.
Hi, girls.
Debbie Ross has been living in this hotel room for months.
This is it.
With just a few cherished possessions, like her husband's ashes and her cats. But the rest of her belongings, such as her bed and other furniture, is still here at Birchwood Terrace, unused until Ross and her fellow tenants get the green light to move back in.
And if people think that we are having a good time in here, you've got to give your head a shake. I'm not milking the system. I just cannot afford to go and move my stuff out.
Tenants were forced to vacate with just 8 hours' notice after a serious structural issue was found in the steel columns of the St. James Building's parkade.
No one from Birchwood Terrace will end up on the streets.
In May, the NDP government announced the province will cover the housing for any resident that's been displaced, and they haven't stopped paying since.
We asked the province how much money they've spent so far and how many people are still living in hotels. They got back to us and said they didn't know. The caretaker of the building told the tenants about 60 people are going to move back in. That means this could end up costing the government over $1 million when you look at the length of time that people have been staying in the hotels, plus the cost of the hotel.
It could take years.
These tenants say it's time the owner of the building, Ladco Company, be held accountable.
They should take some responsibility for neglect. When you are owning a building, you should keep it up to standard. And they certainly haven't done that.
And that Ladco should be paying their hotel bill.
Honest to God, they should be paying the price for us. It should not be the city or the province.
Ladco declined a request for comment. They sent a notice to tenants earlier this month saying they hope some people can move back in mid-October, but they will have to pass the city's inspections before that happens. Kristen Annabelle, CBC News, Winnipeg.
In a bail hearing for Chad Cabez, Crown Attorney Sean Sass alleges that Cabez and his girlfriend Irene Lima were the owners and operators of a website on the dark web called Goddess May Barefoot Premium Crush. Sass says the two made videos of animals, specifically cats and kittens, being crushed by Lima using her feet, then sold for profit. These are not quick kills, as the timestamps seem to indicate. Some of these videos are 5 minutes long. They're staged, premeditated torturings that result in the death of very vulnerable animals. In August, the animal protection officer got an anonymous tip from someone on the dark web. The tipster discovered the Barefoot Crush site and believed the couple involved were from Winnipeg. Winnipeg police started investigating and found a Reddit account called Fit Foot Lover, which they believed belonged to Cabez. On the Reddit page, Cabez talks about Lima's feet and makes references to his dark website. For anyone who's following my girlfriend's crush adventures, please DM me on how to find her newly established group elsewhere. Police say the anonymous source conversed with Cabez on Reddit and got instructions on where to find the videos and how to pay. The main page of the dark website reads, "This is a place to exchange barefoot hard crush. Previews of May's work will be posted and her content will be available for purchase. Each member will be required to provide one barefoot hard crush video prior to entry. DM for details." Sass describes the posts almost like commercials. When discussing the website, he says, "It's an extremely graphic image that appears to be of a bare foot on top of some animal. It's unrecognizable." Police executed a search warrant on October 9th and arrested Cabez and Lima for various cruelty offenses. Cabez was released on bail with conditions. His defense lawyer, Ethan Pollock, says, "This is essentially a risk assessment in us determining whether or not Mr. Cabez can be released back into the community on conditions. It's the position of defense counsel that my client can be." Lima was in court Thursday, but the case was remanded to a later date. Cabez is scheduled to return to court November 5th. None of the charges have been proven in court. Mike Arsenault, CBC News, Winnipeg. Winnipeg police respond to a variety of calls, but the ones about mental health are becoming the focus. The Manitoba government is reviewing the Mental Health Act.
We've heard from police that sometimes they don't need to be called in, and we know that police are stretched.
The goal is to take some of the onus away from police and create more non-police options. Minister Bernadette Smith says the Mental Health Act hasn't been reviewed in 25 years, and they're consulting with experts about potential changes. The health liaison for Winnipeg Police Service, Inspector Helen Peters, says it supports the move. Peters says WPS received 234 Mental Health Act forms from May to August, which puts onus on police to respond to mental health calls.
The police officer is the only person with the authority then to detain a person involuntarily by way of a form that has been issued by a judge or a justice of the peace.
Peters says changes to the act could allow police to share the workload with people trained for mental health calls so police can focus on crime and investigations.
One response does not meet the need, and instead of looking to remove responses, what we will hope for is that addition of different types of responses to meet different needs.
The Coalitions of Families Affected by Police Violence is a group looking for change in the system. It's advocated for the family of James Woods, who died in January after being restrained by police. Megan Daniel says Toronto rolled out a crisis team pilot project with no police involved.
They diverted 78% of the calls received from 911 with no police involvement. And so I think that that's an enormous success.
The province says the review on the Mental Health Act is going to take some time, but didn't give specifics on how it will work. Mike Arsenault, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Have you ever noticed police officers at Superstore? Data obtained by CBC News shows Loblaw spends about $200,000 a month on them. The company says it's to deter thieves and protect staff and customers. Retail crime is on the rise in Winnipeg, but not everyone can afford to hire police to work in their stores.
Or do you want the paste?
Sarah and Renee Esperanza have run El Izalco Market for 24 years.
You want pupusas?
The Latin American store is in the heart of the West End, and that's come with a lot of challenges.
Very much every day we have someone that comes, can you help me? Some people, they ask, can you help me with a glass of water or bottle of water or juice, whatever? Some people, they just come and snatch the bags, packages and run.
She says someone steals from her store every single day, totaling hundreds of dollars in losses a week. It's not enough to make an insurance claim, but is big enough to have an impact on her small business. One time, a guy even pulled a knife on her and demanded she open the till, but she didn't have much in it.
Como ya no tenemos bolsa, it's 11 o'clock. How much money I could have in cash? So he put away the knife, he grabbed the drink, and he walked out. And then he tells me, you're such a cool lady.
Since then, she's taken steps to protect herself, which she didn't want to share publicly for safety reasons. Data obtained by CBC News through Freedom of Information shows since January 2019, Winnipeg police have worked over 163,000 hours of overtime for the private sector, costing over $20 million. Over 43% of those hours were officers working at Superstore locations. It's through a program called Special Duty, which allows off-duty police to take on overtime shifts. They work security for Winnipeg Jets games, escort trucking and construction companies moving heavy equipment, or work in retail outlets to deter theft. Superstore says it's worked to keep customers, employees, and stores safe. It wouldn't say if the cost of officers is passed on to shoppers. Walmart is the second biggest retail client behind Loblaw. They started using special duty officers at their Winnipeg stores in 2022 and is now spending an average of $52,000 each month. Superintendent Dave Dalal says the demand for officers has grown.
Every year seems to be a record number of people trying to hire police, such that we really have to take a look, just like voluntary overtime, we have to take a look at whether we're causing officer burnout.
Winnipeg police say reported incidents of retail theft have increased by 46% in 2024 compared to last year. And 2023 had the highest volume of occurrences in the past 10 years.
They're going in brazenly. They're not worried about being caught. They're targeting specific items. In 2019, it was liquor. Now it's translated into our over retail business community.
Inspector Jennifer McKinnon says the thieves are either trading those goods for drugs or firearms or selling them online through social media marketplaces. The Retail Council of Canada says these types of thefts are costing businesses up to $200 million a year and would like to see the courts cracking down on repeat offenders.
Those organized criminals that are going in with an intended shopping list of items to steal that are highly convertible to cash on a resale market, those are the ones we're concerned about. Those are the tens of thousands of dollars that can maybe leave an electronics store, a grocery store, a home improvement store every week.
The province partnered with police to pilot an anti-theft initiative that placed dedicated officers at retail hotspots in the West End, Osborne Village, and downtown areas. That program ends in October, and since the officers are all on overtime, there's concern it's not sustainable long-term. Justice Minister Matt Weave says the government is looking at other possible solutions.
How can we engage security, private security, to be properly trained and maybe fill some of these gaps that we've seen that have been created by underfunding to law enforcement.
Esperanza has seen a difference since officers began patrolling the West End, and she'd like to see them stay. Caroline Bargood, CBC News, Winnipeg.
For a time, walking was something Christian Swan could only dream about. The 46-year-old has diabetes. His ankle and foot were amputated more than 2 years ago after an infection.
I was dreaming I was walking. And if that sounds crazy, that's how it happened for me. I dreamt I was walking, and eventually I got to the stage where I started walking.
Swan learned to walk again with the help of a prosthetic leg. His amputation, likely one of the cases in a recent report. The Canadian Institute for Health Information found between 2020 and 2023, Manitoba saw more than double the national average of diabetes-associated leg amputations. It says Manitoba also saw more ankle and below amputations. Swan was on a trip when a foot wound developed. He visited hospital and was cleared to drive home. He doesn't know if it was the long drive back to Winnipeg or wait in hospital here that infection set in.
The toe started turning black, like it was crazy. It was just like you knew that something was going on, and then they broke the news to me.
You'll see that this toe is gone.
Dr. John Emble works with Winnipeg's Health Sciences Centre Limb Preservation Program. He says people with diabetes are at high risk for foot wounds and infections. He says the program sees upwards of 3,000 Manitoba patients a year. Almost all have diabetes.
And they're with us as long as it takes, and then we continue to follow people for life.
He says early detection and early intervention are key in trying to reduce the number of amputations.
If you can prevent end-stage complications, such as lack of sensation in the feet and suboptimal blood supply to the feet, you can prevent many of those complications and you can prevent the amputations.
The hospital had done their scans.
Darlene Tunney lost toes on her right foot. Now she's learning to live with an amputation below her left knee. Complications came after she went into hospital with pneumonia last November.
My left leg was my good leg. So it was a surprise to find that it had gone black and needed amputation, because I tried to check pretty daily my feet after losing my toe.
She says losing her independence and relying on others, like home care, is difficult. She cautions people to take diabetes seriously.
You can't play around with this disease. It will kill you.
She'd like to see more places like Uville Diabetes Center where people can see a nutritionist, a counselor, or nurse all under one roof. Swan says he didn't know enough.
People have reached out to me, asked questions, and then the next thing you know, they're in the hospital and they're getting treated for a similar situation.
Now he shares his story to help others. Alana Cole, CBC News, Winnipeg.
This is the house where 39-year-old Sukhdil Singh Gill was killed last September in northwest Winnipeg, a case now tied to the tensions between Canada and India. A year later, it still concerns area resident Inderjeet Singh Brar.
We were very concerned about that. It was like early morning when this happened, and the kids were going to the school at the time. And I don't want this thing to happen in this community.
The RCMP alleged Monday agents of the Indian government may have played a role in widespread acts of violence in Canada. And sources tell CBC News police are actively investigating whether Gill's homicide is connected to 3 men accused in the high-profile shooting death in June 2023 of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey. Nijjar's killing fractured the relationship between Canada and India. Parmjeet Gill with the Sikh Society of Manitoba says the tension between the two countries is weighing on some members of the Sikh community.
Yeah, we have concern all over. I talk to my colleagues too, and we want to be a peaceful, and then all the relationship be established and peaceful in a good faith.
Tensions flared last year when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced in the House of Commons evidence linking Indian agents to the killing of Nijjar. Winnipegger Vikram Singh is worried about the diplomatic feud.
Whenever there is a conflict between the countries, we say that the issues should be resolved by diplomacy. But see now, India and Canada both are they're terminating the diplomats. So I don't know how they're gonna fix the problem.
Brar worries those tensions could have a potential impact on some people now living here who require visas to travel back to India.
The thing is, when we go back to the India, so in the airports, then we have to get more investigated.
He hopes investigators can get to the bottom of what happened in his neighborhood. Winnipeg police say they're still investigating the Gill homicide. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Yeah, we're going to throw a plot.
Marking out a 4-meter circumference, Farron Sharp is counting how many jack pine seedlings are still thriving, years after being planted in the ashes of a defunct forest. That is part of a survival assessment undertaken in the fall to track the progress in reforesting Manitoba's Interlake along Highway 6 and south of Grand Rapids.
Fully grown forest used to be here, and then it became a dead forest from the pine budworm. And then once it was salvaged, it became total burn ground. So all of this land was completely black in 2021.
Dead trunks surround Devil's Lake, their charred roots hidden under the tall grass, high and dry soil, ideal for a new generation of trees to grow.
When you're planting by stumps, there's going to be a breakdown of what's underneath the ground there, and it also means if a tree grew there once, it's going to grow there again.
Blue Green Planet Project began planting seedlings in the spring of 2022. Now from 7 Manitoba First Nations.
The biggest part of that is the reconciliation.
Floyd North is a liaison for the communities. He says while reforestation projects often take place on their land, for many First Nations, becoming a part of the forest industry has been a long time coming.
We're trying to create businesses in the treaty communities and try and get them into the game.
2.8 million seedlings have been planted in over 1,300 hectares so far.
The survival rate on the trees they planted is 95%, which is exceptional.
The forest was part of over 1 million hectares of land, which burned down in Manitoba in 2021. That year saw hundreds of wildfires, one of the worst seasons in the last decade. The goal now is to plant 20 million trees in the region by 2030.
If we can reestablish forest and help capture some of that carbon and help reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, hopefully we'll be able to help slow the spread of wildfire, but also encourage other people to take on projects like this.
But if the flames tear through Devil's Lake once again, cones from the new black spruce and jack pines should be able to regenerate the forest.
This project is part of a larger push by the federal government to restore Canada's canopy. They want to plant 2 billion trees by 2031 in hopes rehabilitating forests like this will help ease climate change. Santiago Arias, CBC News, Devil's Lake, Manitoba.
When an elderly woman picked up the phone back in 2022, she thought it was her grandson on the other end. He was in trouble and asking for money because he'd been arrested. She went to the bank and took out $9,000 in $100 bills. She took the bills back to her house, then handed them over to a woman who showed up at her door. Turns out it wasn't her grandson on the phone, and the grandmother wasn't the only one being targeted. In a Winnipeg court this week, the Ontario woman who picked up the cash from the grandmother was sentenced to a year of house arrest. Gabrielle Paradis was what prosecutors called a money mule in a scheme where 9 elderly people lost nearly $90,000. The victims got most of that cash back, but the judge talked about how they still all live with the shock of it. The judge said, "The emotional impact, the feeling perhaps of embarrassment of falling for this sort of scam, and having their confidence shaken and their family's confidence shaken are implications that go well beyond just the money." Another Ontario woman charged in the same scheme got 18 months of house arrest earlier this year. But court heard we still don't know who is behind the scam. Caitlin Gowerluck, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Laura Chase rents a unit in a fourplex house built in the 1960s, at a time when asbestos was widely used in a range of building materials.
The water damage on the ceiling had been right about there.
In the past 2 years, the Residential Tenancies branch ordered her landlord to make various repairs, such as replacing drywall that had water damage, fixing the bathtub faucet, and replacing windows. In 2023, the property manager sent a representative to get samples for asbestos testing. The results came back negative in drywall plaster in the bedrooms and beside the kitchen window, and negative in fiberglass insulation.
Based upon the first tests that were done, that were apparently negative, they went ahead and they started doing work.
Chase became suspicious about the test results, so she hired a testing company. One of the samples came back positive for asbestos in the drywall joint compound on the bathroom ceiling. She later got testing done for the drywall joint compound in the bedroom, and it was also positive for asbestos.
So after the windows were replaced and before the bathroom was renovated, I did the testing and I found the results were indeed positive. And that was alarming because 3 windows had been replaced without any precautions.
Asbestos is a carcinogenic material, and if it becomes airborne and is inhaled, it can cause fatal illnesses such as mesothelioma and asbestosis. Canada has banned the use of asbestos-containing materials, but they were widely used in construction materials until about 1990. This year, British Columbia became Canada's first province to have a law that requires licensing of employers doing asbestos abatement work and certification of workers who do the job, including sampling and testing. Laura Chase says Manitoba should do the same.
Clearly, the current situation is unsafe. It was unsafe in my case, and the fact that there's so little accountability because there is no license. A person can't lose a license that they don't have in the first place. So how can there be any kind of accountability in a system like this?
The province says that's being evaluated in a review of the Workplace Safety and Health Act, with recommendations expected in early 2025. CBC News contacted the property manager for Chase's house about the asbestos test results, but a spokesperson declined to discuss the case. When Chase decided to get her own asbestos testing done rather than rely on the property managers, she contacted Winnipeg firm J&D Environmental to get the samples for testing.
What you're showing us here is actually an incredibly common issue.
Danielle Kolba is founder and president of J&D Environmental, as well as Duracan Laboratory Group. He has about 20 years' experience in asbestos work and consulting.
You get false negatives quite often on sites, and this is where you want competent people or consulting firms that actually know how to collect the sample, know where those samples should be collected from, and get you the most authentic data possible to determine if there's asbestos in it.
Kolba says it's important to make sure the sample collection for asbestos testing is always done by an independent third-party company rather than by the contractor who will be doing the renovation work. Vera-Lynn Kubanek, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg firefighters have struggled to keep up with the number of vacant building fires.
Last year, the city started billing for the cost of sending crews to battle the blazes. But now the fire department says those fees may have done more harm than good. Last year, the city issued a total of $1.15 million worth of fees for fires in vacant buildings. So far, they've collected nearly $78,500. In some cases, the high fees may have discouraged property owners from making repairs, leading to repeat fires. City staff recommend lowering the fees in the hope more owners will pay up. Mayor Scott Gillingham says he's open to changes.
The goal is to get the result we need, and the result we need is fewer vacant and derelict properties, and those properties turned into developed properties.
The city assesses fees based on the number of fire trucks and other equipment responding. The average fee per property is $26,000, with the highest bill for $138,000. The city recommends a new set of fees, starting at $5,000 for the first fire, up to $20,000 for the fourth and subsequent fires. The William White neighborhood has some of the highest numbers of vacant building fires. Neighborhood Association President Darrell Warren doesn't support lowering the fees.
To the people in the neighborhood, they would probably see the city as being weak. And what I mean by that is the city being weak is they're backing down from these guys.
The city would also write off about $900,000 worth of fees issued last year. The service stopped issuing new fees in December after hearing complaints from property owners. Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Chief Christian Schmidt says in some cases, owners were in the midst of making repairs when a repeat fire occurred.
We need to be cognizant of that, and we don't want to be contributing to some of the problems. We want to be helping to resolve some of the issues in the city.
The city also recommends introducing a new process to waive fees for property owners in some circumstances. The Executive Policy Committee will debate the proposed changes next week. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Jonathan says he was meters away when the man went into cardiac arrest and he leapt into action. Jonathan joins us by Zoom now. Welcome to the program. Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Take us back to Sunday. It's just after 10 a.m. People are coming across the finish line. When did you realize that something was wrong?
Yeah, you nailed it when you said it was 10 a.m. That's like the busiest time at the finish line for the half marathon. It's that 2-hour mark. And I was just doing my walking around at the finish line, just making sure, checking boxes, and coming back up towards the finish line, I saw someone go down, and immediately St. John's ambulance, our first aiders at the finish line, jumped into action, and I got down there, and about a couple seconds after, probably about a minute after he went down, and I felt the guy's carotid pulse, and he was pulseless. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. And with having the previous history of being a paramedic, you can tell pretty quickly someone who's, lifeless or flaccid versus someone who still has, muscle tone and muscle composure. So I knew right away this guy was out for the count. Full cardiac arrest.
Was it easy for you or what were you even thinking when your brain swapped from race director to someone with a history of paramedicine service? I mean, did that just kind of happen on the fly?
It did, in a sense. For me, the scary thought and the thing was I knew the gentleman personally, in a sense of he comes to the shop quite often, and so that when I rolled his body over and looked down to see who it was, I went, oh my God, immediately in my head. But I didn't want to give off any kind of shock or vibration that, there's even more of a panic here, because that would just send everyone into a spiral. So ripped off his bib right away, handed over to the timekeepers to get a hold of his wife. And then immediately, like every single link and chain of command through the whole process was a direct result of the positive outcome for this guy. Definitely, I would say having that previous medical training and history for sure. But I'll say every person that hopped in, like we had off-duty nurses, some gentlemen hopped the fence and started compressions. Are my race committee members doing, bag valve mask, artificially breathing for him. And we were able to, shock him with the AED and revive him, resuscitate him.
And CPR is a team effort, isn't it?
Oh, it's a full team effort. Like, you need to have like a quarterback, call it, who is calling the shots. Okay, you on compressions, you on the airway, you on the AED kind of thing. So it has to be that saying that there's no broken links in our system there. So I really do attribute that to the positive outcome, because if there was a broken link in there was a delay in getting the AED, there's a delay getting compressions going, or delay in any of those processes, it probably wouldn't have been that good of an outcome. I mean, there's no good spot to have a cardiac arrest, but I'll say that he fell at the right place at the right time. Because if he had fallen, say, 500 meters previous on Shaftesbury Boulevard before coming to the finish chute area, maybe it would have been a different outcome. Maybe the AED wouldn't have been applied as quick, or compressions would have been started as quickly, or checking for a pulse and all those kind of things, right? So in that thing, like, literally every single minute is unbelievably important. So I'm so thankful for our team and the logistics, on the medical side, and everyone involved to make this happen.
You got to see him in hospital. How's he doing?
Yeah, I to this day, to this moment, I'm texting with him, and every day, almost a couple times a day, I'm checking in with him. Yeah, right after the race wrapped up and we cleaned up the race, it's all I had in my mind was, I need to go see him. Like, I need to go see how he's doing. So yeah, I paid a visit to him after the race. And you know what? We were talking and chit-chatting and, smiling and having some jokes and some small talk about running and just like life in a weird way. Like, I think in that moment, he was pretty naive to what had just happened. I think it's now starting to process and set in. But he jokingly said he wants to ring the PR bell because he ran a personal best that day. And in his words, he was joking around that his Apple Watch didn't stop, so he never got to actually officially record on his own thing for Strava or whatever that he got the personal best. So he said, next year I'm going to come back and actually get it recorded in that sense. But nonetheless, his time did record when he came through the finish line. And that was a small little fun moment there to see him smiling. And I held his hand tight and said, man, you're one lucky dude. You're one lucky guy.
What did he say?
He said, he was almost speechless. I said, like, Google it up, look it all up, like, people who have cardiac arrests and the outcomes. I said, like, you are like this, like, I'm talking to an angel right now. I said, it's really remarkable. In my career, I said 90% of the time plus it goes the other way, where you try all the efforts in the world to resuscitate someone and the outcome wasn't as good. So I think in all this chaos and tests and stuff that's happening now in the hospital for him these next couple of days, it'll start to really sink in and set in that, there's angels looking over him. And we're joking around. He said, well, man, you're invincible, almost invincible. A cardiac arrest didn't take you out. He said, watching you like stub your toe and collapse. Something else crazy. He said, you know what, you're count your blessings, man. You're back here. You're on this earth. 2 beautiful young children and a wife. Like, it generally is a miracle. It's amazing.
Jonathan, it sounds like you're still sort of processing the events. Have you made space to think about this or to talk it through?
Yeah, I have a little bit, and it's so. I'm in a whirlwind right now in my own thoughts in my brain, and I'll say that. Like, as a paramedic for all those years I worked as a paramedic, I was pretty good in my own mind at compartmentalizing these things and not attaching myself emotionally or personally to the patients or these scenes that we would roll up on, whether it be horrific or young children or old, young, or whatever the scenarios were. And I never, ever really took it home with me or whatever, but I think with a personal connection to me, knowing this guy and the relationship I have with him, and he was just in the store on Tuesday, and I saw him at the race expo. I shook his hand and we chit-chatted and was excited about the race. And now I had to like switch onto this like race director hat and be like, I genuinely it's not my fault what happened there, but I feel responsibility until he gets home and out of the hospital, in a sense that, then I think my mind will be put at ease at that point. Just because it carries a lot of weight. I would say it's definitely it's a tough thing. It's any race director, any person's worst nightmare. And for that to happen, so just, yeah, so many different avenues and thoughts in my head on that. But I know he's going to make a good recovery. He's in the best hands there at St. Boniface Hospital. And I'm going to see it through all the way through, to when he gets home and that kind of thing. I think at that point, I'll be able to rest my mind a bit more.
Jonathan, I'm glad that he's doing well, and I'm also glad that you're managing okay as also. You did a good thing. Thank you for making space to talk about it, and we'll talk again soon. Take good care.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I just want to leave in saying that early CPR and the use of an AED does truly save lives. It's so vitally important. So thank you.
And you are a good example of how that can save lives. Jonathan Turquia is the founder and director of the Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service Half Marathon. He is also the owner of City Park Runners.
The federal immigration minister, Mark Miller, is in Winnipeg this week. He was at an immigration ceremony yesterday, which welcomed more than 80 new citizens to Canada, and he is in studio. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm eager to hear about that bison story. It sounds like it's out of an episode of Yellowstone.
It sounds like it's incredulous, right? As far as the story goes, yeah. How was the citizenship ceremony? Obviously, in your role, you must attend many of these, but what was yesterday like?
I do. They're great. It's hard to get into my minister role because you're just cheering for these guys that have hope. It gives me hope for the country. People are fought to become Canadian. I was given my citizenship, so not that I take it for granted. I think we're the best country in the world, but these people fought to become Canadians. This is a day they'll remember for the rest of their lives, and they're there waving the flag, taking the oath to Canada, and there to make this country better than it is already. So it's really cool to see. I don't get yelled at by them, and it's probably the last point in time where they actually have to listen to me. But that's why we're a democracy. They don't have to listen to politicians after you become a Canadian citizen, and it's just cool to be part of it. And I get to administer the oath, which is almost surreal. But this is really a day about them and being a part of that. I would encourage anyone, elected officials, otherwise, just to be part of them because it really renews your faith in Canada.
Are you being yelled at a lot as a Canadian politician right now?
It happens. It happens. Mostly on Twitter, but I think, frankly, the discourse in Canada has become toxic, but most of my interactions with regular folks is pretty respectful.
Let's talk about some of those regular folks. You're wearing headphones this morning because we have a clip we want to play of a student here, actually. So obviously universities are starting to see the financial implications of the cap on international students. At U of M here locally, University of Manitoba, they're expecting this could be a loss of about $8 million just by the numbers. But international students who are here are also feeling this financial stress because your government reinstated this off-campus work cap. So just for listeners' benefit here, 20 hours a week now. It will go up to 24 hours at some point this fall. So let me stop there for a second. Do we have a timeline on when yet?
Really shortly. We have to make some tweaks to the regulations to get them through, but it's a matter of weeks, I think.
Okay, so this is of concern to U of M student Krupa Ashru. She worked 25 to 30 hours a week last year. Here's what she had to say about how the cap is impacting her life.
It's scary, mostly. I had to move from my old apartment to a further one from both work and uni just because it's more cheaper and so I can afford it better. Because of the limit, it's like I have to put work first and then focus on school later because I know that school is going to be there. It has the set schedule, but for work I need to fix it in somehow so that I'm working all the 24, making the most of it.
I'm sure you're hearing Minister Miller stories like this across the country. How do you defend why this is necessary?
Look, I totally feel for, I think it's important for people to understand my role and some of the tensions that I was dealing with. I was getting calls to cut off-campus hours completely. The 40-hour work week was clear was impacting studies. We bring people in here to study and not to work. At the same time, not naive as to what it costs to live in Canada. So the balance that we're trying to strike to make sure that people are prioritizing their studies is why we fixed that 24-hour period, because we recognize that 20 hours is a lot. I've struggled through that as a student as well. I know your studies are suffering unless you're unless you're an exceptional individual. But it is really the exception of people that can work over 20 hours. 24 felt like a balance. It brings us into what is sort of the international norm. There are some countries where people can't work when they're international students. They have to figure out another way to make money. So it's a delicate balance. And as we're adjusting the international student visa system, we want to make sure that the perverse incentives for people to kind of exploit the system are not there. Giving the impression that people can come and not focus on their studies is one of those. But striking that balance, I think, is something I had to struggle with. And it's something we'll completely continue to re-examine. But my focus on this revised, revamped reform system is to focus more on quality and less on quantity.
I want to ask you about another system that's changing. Obviously, you're looking at reducing the number of permanent residents and temporary residents in this country that Canada accepts. Now, there's smaller provinces like ours in Manitoba, which you're well aware of, who want more immigrants. I know that our parliamentary reporter, our legislative reporter rather, Ian Frey, sat down with the provincial immigration minister here, Malaya Marcelino, a few weeks ago. Marcelino said, she would like more than the 9,500, which is the number that we're using, provincial nominees that have been offered in 2024. Is there a scenario where you could imagine, as you're making these decisions, and we're going to hear your numbers in November, I understand, right, for the next 2 years, Canada's targets?
Yep.
But is there a scenario where if one province says we can meet the cap that the feds are asking for, and Manitoba wants to bring in more people, that we can take numbers from another province effectively and bring in more people here, and still federally and nationally you're going to be meeting the numbers that you're targeting? Or is this going to be a flat number that each province is going to be bringing in?
Without kind of scooping my own announcement, Marcy, what I have said to the Premier a couple days ago, what I said to Minister Marcelino is as follows. For provinces that are willing to work with us and willing to be responsible in their duty to make sure that immigrants are well supported when they get here and contributing to the economy, we're willing to work with provinces that take that responsibility. The federal government over the last few years has progressively given to provinces about 100,000+ immigrants to select themselves according to their own criteria. They haven't all necessarily been responsible in the way they've deployed that, and come back to the government complaining that there's too many people and that they don't have the infrastructure to support them. So you can't have it both ways. Part of making sure that we have a controlled immigration system is making sure the federal government is keeping an eye on those institutions, including provinces, including universities and colleges, that have that exceptional privilege of being able to take people in from abroad, but making sure they're actually following through with that and making sure that they're being responsible in supporting these people as they integrate into a new country. So what I said to the Premier is work with us. There's certainly some reflections going on about the acceptable levels of temporary residence in this country, the acceptable numbers of permanent residents. I hear Canadians when they say we need to make sure that we have volumes that are acceptable. And that means every province has to step up and make sure that they are doing their jobs. They can't come to me on one hand and say, we want more people, but then cut immigration. It just doesn't make sense. It would be a complete gutting of the federal government's responsibility. So I've told Manitoba has been exceptionally cooperative with us, has been very positive, at least this iteration of the government. And I think it's something that we can get done together.
How are you going to judge that, though? Because across the country, we have a housing shortage, for example. So if you go to a province and you say, following through the resources, and Manitoba says, well, we're trying to keep up with housing, every province is going to say that. You can't really judge Manitoba or individual provinces for not following through with some of the resources because there's crises that are affecting all of the nation. So how do you judge whether or not a province is positioned, in your view, when you look at the federal numbers, to be able to handle and to be, as you put, upholding their end of sort of the commitment to this?
Well, I think data sets you free in this discussion. The public rhetoric and their past practices and how they've been talking about immigrants and publicly is a good indicator, but data is even a better indicator. So if you look at the job market, look at what postgraduate work permits match the needs in their provinces, that's not data that the federal government has complete authority over. We have our sense of where the jobs are needed, but we need to be able to have a better integrated system with provinces so they can tell us which job markets require that type of immigrant and how they can properly absorb them and support them along the way. We've been able to have pretty good proof points with the province of Manitoba in their responsibility in making sure that their provincial nominee program is adapted to the people that are already here. And Manitoba said quite clearly they want to grow the country, so we'll work with them. It's not a one-way discussion, and so that'll be an evolving discussion. There are discussions in and around infrastructure, the support for the healthcare services, support for education. We need also the sense of what commitments that provinces will make to make sure that we can absorb the number of immigrants that they're asking for. So it's simply about discussion about responsibility and the data to support a lot of the sort of allegations they make to us when they come and ask for more people.
I know you're not going to trump your announcement. I know it's in November, but it's going to set out the next 2 years. So you will reduce the number of people that are admitted to this country each year. Can you give us a sense of how big that reduction will be?
I can't at this moment. They're really ongoing discussions.
Fair
I would say the reflection is not complete yet. We've had a robust discussion at Cabinet with caucus, but that it's not entirely finalized.
Fair enough. 8:24, we're live with Mark Miller, who's giving us a feature interview in time while he's in Manitoba. He's Minister, of course, of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship in this country. I want to look at a situation that's been very much in the news this week, the relationship between Canada and India, which continues to deteriorate over accusations of foreign interference, government-approved violence on Canadian soil, allegations of such. In September, you said visa applications from India could face more scrutiny, was your language, in the future. What kind of scrutiny are you talking about, and how does that look right now?
Well, first, I think it's important to say that regardless of your position in Cabinet or as an elected official, your number one job is to keep Canadians safe. And foreign interference is serious. The fact that a country can come in and perpetrate criminal acts is something that we need to have zero tolerance for and be quite severe in our reaction. Anything that flows from that is what it is. I can't say that this is not going to get worse before it's going to get better when it comes to what India may do. I have no particular sense of how they may react. We know what they did a few months ago, expelling diplomats, including members of my team. That affected visa processing times. You can only adjust so much, but what I have said to my colleague members of Parliament is that this could very well get worse in terms of visa processing before it gets better.
What does that mean, get worse in terms of visa processing?
Well, whatever decisions that India in its sovereign right decides to take with respect to members exiting their country and desiring to go to Canada, it is up to them, but that could have an impact. And whatever countermeasures that they may take with respect to people seeking to go to India, there's only so much you can adjust for that. And again, we are at a very, very tense situation with India. And again, foremost is the concern for the safety of people that are in Canada. And there can be zero tolerance for people coming into this country and perpetrating criminal acts. So what that means in real time for people from most of the Indian diaspora trying to go back and forth is there could be some headaches. But again, it could get worse before it gets better. We're very much at the beginning of the public display or the public ventilation of these facts, and so we have to brace for that.
Indian citizens who are already here as permanent residents or on those student or work visas right now, how concerned should they be about their immigration status going forward?
If they're already here, my number one job is to make sure they're safe. When it comes to their immigration status, I would say it's par for the course. There is a rigorous process to screen people, to assess whether they are eligible to become permanent residents and then Canadian citizens. That continues. But again, in these situations, my concern is really for the safeties of the diaspora that feel threatened by the actions of a foreign power.
You've announced to another population of people, you've announced that Palestinians who fled Gaza will receive transitional financial assistance once they arrive here. I know you've already approved, 4,000 applications have been approved, but only 334 have arrived. Why so few? Or is that maybe when you look at the trajectory of when the applications came into 334, maybe that's not few, maybe that's on pace of what you would expect. And what is that exact assistance going to look like?
So the assistance that we'll provide to people that get here include interim health benefits, settlement services that people that come here from war-torn countries would get as a matter of course. These are people that are under an extreme amount of trauma, so they are and will be supported by the government of Canada as they adapt to their new temporary home. In terms of the processing, there's a war ongoing in Gaza, and the devastation is enormous. The challenges we faced as a government is getting people out of Gaza into Egypt and processing them there. There was no functional ability to do biometrics in Gaza. The safety and security situation is one of concern. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that when you list a group like Hamas as a terrorist organization, that has impacts, and sometimes that can have impacts on innocent people as part of the processing. The processing is slow, but first and foremost, there are things that are beyond our control, our ability to get people out of Gaza. That also means that a guy like me has to be very careful in their public statements of what they say is going on, because I have an important diplomatic function in making sure that I am liaising with, or my teams are liaising with authorities on the ground with whom we may not have necessarily the same thoughts about the situation, whether that's the Israeli government or the Egyptian authorities. But we have to make sure that people are safe. So I'm trying to reunify people with their families if they have them here and get them to Canada as quickly as possible. It has been slow. The success has been mitigated, but it doesn't prevent our resolve. And I'm committed to getting the 5,000 people that we committed to getting to as part of our initiative, our expanded initiative earlier on this year.
And just as a final question, Minister Miller, and Dan Vandal, this just happened yesterday, so I'm switching gears here, but Dan Vandal has said he will not run again. Longtime MP out of St. Boniface. But there's also a lot of buzz, people talking about why. And there's a number of your colleagues, at least 20 elected representatives now, who've signed this document circulating among your fellow Liberals that are not in support of Justin Trudeau's leadership. Where do you stand on Justin Trudeau?
Look, I wouldn't mix the departures of those ministers with
fair enough, yeah,
with the other situation. Dan has been an exceptional friend and colleague, particularly in my previous file with Indigenous issues. I'll miss him, but he's doing it for very personal reasons, and I think he would be the first to be shocked if it were suggested it was out of question of loyalty to the Prime Minister. Because he's an outstanding guy.
So
given my position as a minister, given my proximity to the Prime Minister, I'm probably not the first person that people come to if they're pissed off at the Prime Minister. My own personal reflection on this, without knowing exactly who may or may not have signed a letter that may or may not exist, is that this is the most passive-aggressive, weak type of display of questioning of leadership that I've ever seen. The Prime Minister is colleagues with these individuals, if they are indeed in the numbers that are speculated to be. They owe it to him to go up and tell it to his face. And anyone that's come up to me with any issues with respect to the Prime Minister and said, you got to do this and you got to say this, just say it to his face. He's an open guy. He got them where they are today for the most part. And they owe it to him to say things to his face. And I think he would fundamentally respect that. If they're fearful, that's a reflection on them and their own leadership in their communities. This internal stuff happens. We've always encouraged a party that can speak out and quite harshly against each other at times, but actually to keep it private. And at the end of the day, it makes this group of people look horribly entitled and worried about their own futures. Say it to your face. Let's clear it up and let's focus on the bigger threat, which is what we're currently doing, which is sleepwalking into a Pierre Poilievre win who is only focused on himself and doesn't really care about this country. I know, say what you want about Justin Trudeau. He fundamentally cares about this country and he's going to fight for every inch of it.
Thank you for all of the time. You've been very generous with us this morning. We appreciate having you in studio.
Thank you.
Get down there! Emily Beauregard's wish for her 18th birthday was to meet Maya Turner, the starting kicker and only woman on the University of Manitoba Bison's men's football team.
Oh my God, you were amazing!
On Saturday, her wish came true.
Crazy, huh? Yeah, I do admire you. Like, I was watching your video and I was just like, I want to meet this girl. And I want to do the same as you do. It is really like a man world, but I think we can take our place in that.
Turner has already done that.
and it is good, no doubt about it. Maya Turner from 21 yards out.
Last year, she was the first woman to play and score in a regular season U Sports football game. She made 2 field goals, including the game winner in overtime.
The Manitoba Bisons have won this homecoming football game on the strength of Maya Turner.
She instantly became a role model for other young women like Beauregard, who is also breaking ground as a rookie kicker on the Sherbrooke Cégep men's football team, the first woman in the league.
Like, she kicked like asses on the field, and now I can talk with her and she can give me some advice, and so I think like a lot of girls saw her and was like, holy shit, she can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah, I'm so humbled that she like looks up to me and wanted to come out and see me play. I love to see other girls kicking footballs and playing on men's teams.
All the way from Quebec, coming to watch the Bisons play.
There was initially some doubt about having a female kicker on the Bisons, but that has disappeared.
It was very impressive, but it was very nice to see you like win, because it was very sketch and I was very, very pissing on myself. So.
They've embraced Turner, and they welcomed Beauregard too.
Beauregard and her father flew back to Winnipeg with the team. On Sunday, they got a tour of the University of Manitoba campus and the football complex.
Welcome to the locker room.
As the only woman on the team, Turner has her own changing room.
Yep, this is where I hang out.
But her coach, Brian Doby, says she's just one of the guys.
Her story has resonated across the country.
After 29 years on the job, Doby is retiring this season. He's accomplished a lot, but says few things compare to this experience.
It's so symbolic of what anybody can do, regardless of race, gender, etc. Anybody leading the way and taking a risk.
As for Turner, she's thrilled her accomplishment is inspiring other women who dream of kicking down barriers. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Oh, nice!
It's a harvest one season in the making. Every fall for nearly a decade, people in Poplar River First Nation in eastern Manitoba have been reaping the rewards at no cost. A tub full of corn on the cob, among the vegetables grown and then delivered straight to people's homes by this father-son duo.
It's an unbelievable feeling to be able to work with your son, I think.
Kelly Hindmarch and his son Julius put locally grown food on tables in the Fly-In First Nation. Kelly's father taught him how to grow vegetables. Now he's passing on those skills to his son.
Yeah, and I'm probably the youngest gardener in Poplar River.
Together, they help maintain more than 30 home gardens located in people's yards. Some people here even grow grapes. Kelly and Julius also take care of the community garden. They both find helping the community healing.
I don't mind it. It keeps me away from bad habits.
While a federal subsidy helps keep costs down for fresh food sold at the northern store, the garden gives people another option. They grow pumpkins, potatoes, tomatoes, onions, carrots, cucumbers, and a local favorite, green beans.
Lots of people like beans around here. Go with their moose, that's why.
It's all part of Poplar River's Lands program. Chief Vera Mitchell says it makes a difference for people in the community.
People have little gardens that they plant stuff, but this communal garden has been beneficial. We pull our funding together so that he can do it full time.
Along with the vegetables, the community garden itself is also growing, with expansion plans in the works to make it even bigger for next growing season.
The community garden right now is about 1 acre, and we're in the works of increasing the size to 3 acres.
They're also hoping to add 2 temperature-controlled greenhouses to grow even more vegetables. Poplar River is also opening a butcher shop in this building where people will be able to get wild meat and fish.
The meat shop will be running through the fall and part of the winter.
Food from outside the First Nation comes in on the winter road, by boat, and by plane. Julius says gardens help cultivate a culture of healthy eating and food security.
I would think it's pretty good if younger generations get involved in gardening because of climate change and global change around the world right now.
He worries that could make it more difficult and more expensive to get food to his remote community. which is why he says sowing the seeds for a more sustainable future is so important. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Poplar River First Nation.
I'm Shanley Vidal with CBC Manitoba. The Eaton's retail chain may be long gone, but those memories live on in the Winnipeg home of a former employee. I paid a visit to Corey Quintain to see his growing collection of Eaton's memorabilia.
I used to work for Eaton's from 1995 to 99, and I was always a big fan of the store growing up, and now I have a growing collection of Eaton's memorabilia here in my condo here in Winnipeg. These are ceiling tiles from the downtown Winnipeg store, and when people often see them, they say, "Oh, you did such an interesting job painting them and a great finish." But this is the way they came out of the store, with the paint flaking off the patina like that. So this is how they looked when they were on the ceiling of the downtown Winnipeg store. Eaton's logo that everyone knows and remembers. These went above the doors of most of the exterior entrances of the store. If you went to Eaton's, you probably recognize this from your trips back then. This is from the downtown Winnipeg store, but pretty much every single Eaton's location had these in between the top and bottom panes of glass on their doors. This is mostly what I bought in that big box of things when the store was going out of business, a box of flyers and catalogs from the 70s and 80s. This is one of the most interesting pieces for me personally in the collection. This is the Globe and Mail Report on Business from August 27th, 1999. And you can see there's a young lad here that's holding a store closing sign, running through the store. You can see even the background of the picture is blurry because this young lad is running so fast and so dedicated, and that young lad is me. Most of these came through either, purchasing them from somewhere or being gifted them from somewhere. Most of the stuff that I came into myself was from the 80s and 90s and up. We've got these ones, which were kind of the 80s, 90s, which most people remember, especially people, that are in their 40s and 50s now. But then, of course, we have this one up here, which is from, I think, the 60s and 70s. And this star formation was pretty iconic. When you saw this on the box, back in those days, you knew you were getting something special. In this case, probably a hat. He is the official mascot of Eaton's Toyland. He has his own record, the Pumpkinhead story on one side, and then the Pumpkinhead song on the other, of course. And you would always get a storybook when you went to see Santa at Eaton's back in the, in the mid 1900s and the 50s. All right, so there's a few books here in the library as well. Some of them are newer, kind of the history of Eaton's. This one is really interesting because you realize the date. This is for the 50th anniversary of Eaton's The Golden Jubilee, which happened in 1919. The big downtown stores especially hold a lot of memories for people. I know every time I go to Canada Life Centre, I still rub Timothy's toe on the way by for good luck. If True North wants, a new home for that statue, I think I might have a spot for it.
Meanwhile, Corey Quintain will be looking for one special piece to add to his collection, a 25th anniversary watch. For CBC Manitoba, I'm Shanley Vidal.
Cricket players are soaking up every second of nice weather before winter hits at tournaments like these. And soon, they'll have more places to play in Winnipeg. A new adult-sized pitch is opening in Bridgewater Lakes Park, and one for kids at Chancellor Park.
Players all over the city, they're playing in baseball diamonds, soccer grounds, or even sometimes, on walkways as well.
The Manitoba Cricket Association has more than 60 regulated teams and more than 2,000 players. Thousands more play recreationally, but there's not enough room for everyone.
We were approached by 8 to 10 new teams who wants to be part of the league, but we have to refuse them because we don't have cricket grounds.
Parmjeet Shahi says there are 9 pitches in the province, so players travel to places like Brandon and Winkler to play, a small trade-off for the love of the game.
This year we had to go many times just because Ascendment Park is under construction, so I hope we're gonna get more cricket grounds next year.
The association also wants to work with the city of Winnipeg on booking times. Shahi says matches usually can't start until around 10 a.m., But because of city rules, they have to book time slots starting earlier in the day, meaning they're paying for time they're not actually using.
Usually our games are from anywhere from 5 to 6 hours a day. So we are looking into a policy where we can fit the games and pay fairly to City of Winnipeg, because we also want to pay so that they can maintain the grounds.
The Manitoba Cricket Association has big goals for the future too. They're hoping to one day have a total of 15 or 16 pitches here in the city. Gavin Axelrod, CBC News, Winnipeg.
October is Women's History Month. It's a time to honor and celebrate notable women and their achievements. Throughout this month, we're going to introduce you to women who are breaking barriers. They may be at the top of their career field or helping ensure this province is a little bit better off. These are people we think you should know about. This woman is a Métis athlete, a mom, a lawyer, an advocate, and she's someone giving back to the community. Jamie Menzies, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jamie, you've represented Manitoba a number of times at the North American Indigenous Games, the Canada Games, and you've been named Manitoba's Female Indigenous Coach of the Decade. So I want to start there with sport. And what does sport mean to you?
It's a big question. It's meant different things at different times of my life, but I think the consistent threads are that it's given me spaces to build relationships and feel part of a community. And although the goals have changed, it's always given me a space to work towards goals. And those have looked different over the years, but those have been two important things in my life.
Anybody who's been involved in sport knows how important it can be to them, myself included. And one thing you've really taken is a holistic approach when it comes to your coaching, and you've really been relentless in using sport as a catalyst for social change. So I want you to tell us a little bit about the club that you founded.
Well, Agouchin volleyball. Agouchin is a word that means hanging in the sky or a celestial body, which I thought was a nice, or which my friends and I thought was a nice idea for volleyball. You know, it was kind of born out of frustration and also born out of wanting to use the skills that I have to contribute to something. You know, frustrations being just the lack of women, Indigenous women, Two-Spirit folks, and just Indigenous people generally in elite sport or post-secondary sport or coaching, and trying to kind of create a pathway for that to happen a little bit more in whatever way I can. I didn't do it alone. Agouchin was born out of community support and a lot of people, all hands on deck. And yeah, for 7 years, it's taken different shapes and taken on different projects, but I'm really enjoying working within it.
I love that it's a space where you've made for people to feel safe, be able to grow, be able to ask questions, especially for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. And why do you think places like this club and like other programs like this are so important, especially for Indigenous women and girls?
Well, I think anyone who knows me knows that it's actually not about the volleyball or the sport at all, Agouchin. It is really just about safe spaces for groups of people that historically and currently don't always have safe spaces. It's about keeping like the retention of girls Two-Spirit folks in sport at an age where classically there's a high drop-off rate. And one of the more recent goals of mine is to mentor Indigenous coaches. So that's sort of where I'm putting a lot of my energy right now. I think that representation matters, and to have Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks in positions of authority, or the classically, the positions taken up by white cis men. That's sort of one of Agouchin's projects as well.
When you and I spoke earlier, we talked about making sure that people at a young age had Indigenous superheroes to look up to. You're raising a child of your own. Just speak a little bit about why you think that's so important that we see our Indigenous women, Two-Spirit folk at the top of their game, so that they have, young people have somebody to look up to.
Yeah, well, not only relationally, but also systemically in this country, in a lot of countries. Indigenous women specifically have many powers working against them. In Agutchin sports spaces, we're building Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks up. We're celebrating their skills. We're cheering and, getting people in touch with their bodies, their confidence, play, laughter, joy. I love that my 6-year-old son gets to grow up thinking of Indigenous women as superheroes and super athletes, and not some of the other ways that Indigenous women can be portrayed in media or historically have been framed.
Well, that's all that we have time for. I didn't even get to touch on your advocacy. You're also a lawyer. You give back to so many people, and you are one of our superheroes this month. Jamie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for chatting.
October is Women's History Month. It's a time to honor and celebrate notable women and their achievements. And throughout this month, we're going to introduce you to women who are breaking barriers and helping ensure this province is a little better off. This woman is a passionate champion of Manitoba's creative and cultural sector. Carol Vivier joins me now. Hi, Carol.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, Carol, you spent 3 decades as the CEO and film commissioner for Manitoba Film and Music. Manitoba would quite literally not be what it is, this industry, without you. At the helm, you were trying to sell Manitoba to the world. What did it take to convince Hollywood bigwigs to come shoot in the prairies?
Oh, it's funny because I think about my first trips to Los Angeles, and we didn't even have GPS then. There was nothing. I was using maps, like actual paper maps to work out my routes. But you know what? I think they're very business oriented in Los Angeles, and I think as long as you came across credible and you knew what you were doing, you got a meeting. And so even though at first we certainly didn't have flights, we didn't have a full crew. They still took the meetings, which I really now, and thinking back, really respect that. And then I remember one of the producers I met with said to me, you know what, Carol, you need an incentive to bring us to Winnipeg, to Manitoba. You're just not on the map. And so that's what prompted getting that tax credit. And we were the first Manitoba, the first province in Western Canada to have a tax credit. And it really started that journey. It really helped a lot. So I'm very grateful for having that.
Yeah, you pioneered that film tax credit. As you said, it was the first in Western Canada. That was back in '97. It was really a game changer. So why was that so important to the industry and for you to really help facilitate that to get things going here?
Well, it was really important to the industry because I think you needed to add incentives. And there were incentives in other places, but not as good as the one we ended up with. And it showed them we were serious, we were in the game, and that we really wanted their business. And so for me, it was just a really critical piece of the infrastructure we needed to have here. Along with that first studio that was built, that was really groundbreaking. And, we just continued on, and then we just had great training programs. And even within the tax credit, we had provisions that if we didn't have a crew person available, willing, or able here, they could bring that crew person in from anywhere in the world. But we need to have, if they maximize that, we needed to have 2 Manitobans trained. And so that allowed us to keep building our crew base to where it is today. And like now, it's like crazy how many shoots are going on. I just love it.
It's amazing, and I don't think any Winnipegger can say they haven't seen a film set as they've walked around downtown or in many parts of the city. I love seeing the Christmas movies shooting. So is there a movie or a show that was really like a feather in your cap that you saw when it came here, maybe an actor or actress?
Well, I think there was 2 films that really were breakout for us. One of them was Capote. That was an amazing film. It was won an Academy Award. And then Shall We Dance? Shall We Dance was the largest feature film we ever had here, and it just opened those doors. So I would have to say for offshore production. Those two really kind of set the bar for us.
You are also a Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal recipient. You've been honored with both the Order of Manitoba and last week the Order of Canada. What do these accolades mean to you?
Oh, it's kind of like pinch me. It's really amazing. It's quite incredible, rewarded for something that you love doing. And I never expected them. Like you don't know that you're nominated. So when you get those calls to tell you that you are now a recipient, it really quite literally knocks you off your socks. So I'm very grateful for being honored this way. I never expected it, and I'm really flattered and honored.
Well, Carol, you are one of our women's superstars this month. And I have you here in just a few words and seconds. What would you tell somebody that wants to go into this same field, or your younger self looking back on this?
Oh, to my younger self, I would just say, do what you did. Don't be afraid. Take those risks. When something's presented to you, that's a career move or an opportunity, don't be afraid to do it. Just take those risks, take those chances. It'll always pay off. As long as you're passionate and committed to what you're doing, people will respond to you. And it has to come from your heart, and it has to be sincere, and people know that. So as long as you're doing that, just keep doing what you're doing. It'll happen.
Wise words. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
"42-year-old Rebecca Marina Flett is behind bars after pleading guilty to manslaughter in the death of Phelan Johnston. The attack happened in the Winnipeg core area in June of 2023. Johnston was experiencing homelessness at the time. She was repeatedly attacked by Flett, which led to her death.
In his decision, Provincial Court Judge Dale Harvey said, Flett approached Ms. Johnston from behind and struck her numerous times about the head and body. One person from a group of several individuals standing by intervened to break up the incident. Johnston was living in Salvation Army's Center of Hope at the time of her death. CBC spoke with the 28-year-old in her room there a year before she died. Johnston said she had plans to move into her own place and go back to school for social work. Court heard on the night of the attack, Flett went after Johnston 2 more times, repeatedly punching her in the face. This blow was delivered with enough force to cause her to fall backward where the left side of her head struck the curb of the sidewalk. This effectively was the fatal blow, Harvey said. Johnston was eventually taken back to her room in Salvation Army, but refused help from paramedics. Court heard she was found dead in her room the next morning. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Flett pled guilty to manslaughter 2 weeks ago. Harvey said, the sentence cannot repair the harm done to the victim or her family. What Ms. Flett has done cannot be undone, either by her or through this sentence imposed.
Glad-do factors were taken into consideration during the sentencing. Court heard Flett grew up in the foster care system and was the victim of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Mike Arsenault, CBC News, Winnipeg.
If you haven't snowmobiled before, this is kind of the top level of snowmobiling.
This Lac du Bonnet showroom wouldn't be here if local politicians hadn't set aside their differences and started working together.
It's been beyond overwhelming and incredible.
All right, have a good one. Bye.
The dealership opened in February and says it's done brisk business ever since, but first it had to clear some hurdles.
We're actually on the RM side of Lac du Bonnet, on RM land. And that across the street, across the main highway into town, is town.
The issue? The town of Lac du Bonnet has water and sewer services. The rural municipality does not, and the business couldn't start up without it.
It put the town and the RM in a place where they had to work together.
The town's revamped water treatment plant opened in 2004 with help from the province. It was also meant to serve the surrounding area. 20 years later, that still hasn't happened. People in the RM have been living with boil water advisories and trucking in water for decades.
There was much less of a collaborative approach in respect to what we need to do to support and strengthen our community. And that's changed recently.
After years of rivalry and arguments over funding, the two governments are finally planning to run lines into the RM, bringing people clean water while bringing the town more revenue.
We recognize that, running our water plant at less than 20% capacity is probably not really particularly efficient.
The lack of water not only made life harder, it also stalled growth on both sides of the municipal border.
We need the town needs us.
Both governments say their long-standing disagreements led to stagnation.
There are some perceptions that, yes, there were personality conflicts.
Has that been holding Lac du Bonnet back then?
Yes. We've missed a lot of opportunities over the years because we haven't had the water and sewer infrastructure.
This RM councillor spearheaded a shared community development corporation in 2018 and says it fell apart due to differences in vision. Now, the RM and town are proudly partnering to build water lines and attract developers.
It's over the top exciting for me. It's a very, very positive thing for our region, for us to be moving in this direction. And it's long overdue.
The new alliance is already reaping rewards at Lake Life Power Sports.
Absolutely. We believe in the town, and we think that any further investment in it, there needs to be more.
The councils hope to get more pipes in the ground next year. Emily Brass, CBC News, Lac du Bonnet, Manitoba.
That's awesome.
A moment of freedom. But the exoneration of Clarence Woodhouse, Alan Woodhouse, and Brian Anderson has raised a crucial question. Who killed Ting Fong Chan? He was a chef at Winnipeg's Beachcomber restaurant in 1973 and a father of 2. Lawyer James Lockyer advocates for the wrongfully convicted with Innocence Canada. He says it can be difficult to find the real killer after so long.
To say the trail is cold is to it doesn't quite get to it.
He points to the case of David Milgaard. He was exonerated after DNA evidence identified the true culprit nearly 30 years later. James Lockyer thinks it's unlikely there's DNA evidence in Chan's murder, but he says police do have something else: the names of other people identified as suspects at the time.
Because any other suspects that they identified back in 1973, they discounted because they had decided who had done the crime.
Retired Detective Andrew Mikołajewski saw that when he reviewed the 1981 killing of 16-year-old Barbara Stoppel, after Thomas Sofino was wrongfully convicted. There were missing notes and even evidence.
And that may be some of the disappointment that investigators in this case find.
It's been over 50 years since Chan was killed, so whoever did it could be dead. Lockyer says it's still worth trying to find who's responsible.
There's a societal interest in it too. And there's nothing Brian Anderson, Alan Woodhouse, and Clarence Woodhouse would like more.
Lockyer says Chan's family deserves to know too. Winnipeg police are reviewing the case but declined to comment. Caitlin Gowerluck, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And this is the one that's the issue? And you're using that one for reference? Yeah. Okay. This is my 10th year teaching at the Louisville Arts and Technology Center, and I went into industry. I did complete my Red Seal before going into education and getting my vocab to teach. But it's all mushrooms, so it's not going to pull through. We still have a majority of male students, but we have more and more female students enrolling and actually pursuing it as a career afterward, which is really encouraging. I've been out of the field for a while. I mean, I did start my apprenticeship journey over 20 years ago. So a lot has changed. It definitely required some resiliency, and definitely there was some adversity to overcome.
When I got accepted to come into ATC, I had no idea that there was going to be a woman teacher, but when I did find out, it did feel great, because knowing that there was going to be somebody else there that understands what it's like being a woman in the industry.
There's been a really positive change in industry, and it's becoming more mainstream, more accepting to see females in those roles. It's important just to have representation for any marginalized group, but especially having women in trades, I think that's just opening up doors for more talent. You can get just a bolt kit for that flange. I've never had anyone guess my profession or my career. So yeah, there's definitely students will come in and maybe they weren't expecting maybe what they get. But it's only a matter of a really short time before you build a rapport with students. You know what you did?
What?
Really well on your test.
Really?
Yes. They start to see that, hey, you're an expert in your field. And so you can quickly gain some respect. I think it's really important that we start to shift our focus from maybe what we expect people to look like in certain professions and maybe shift the focus more to people's abilities and their skill sets.
Yeah!
There you go, man. Go for it. What I try to do is just inspire all my students. Success! The ball joint's now officially out of the knuckle.
Yeah!
Whether they're coming from a marginalized group or whether they're, male, female. What I see is students really just benefit from seeing success stories and seeing diversity. And I think that hopefully, that all students are taking something from that.
She's helped me so much to learn and to be a successful mechanic, and for that, she's a great educator. Not any teacher can do that and can teach anyone. It takes a truly great educator to teach someone the right way, even when they struggle.
I feel so privileged to be teaching automotive, but it's exceptionally special just being a woman and being in my position to deliver that. It's just that much more impactful, I hope, and just helping to change that, sort of idea of what a particular profession looks like. Full resistance. Yeah. Nice.
Just wondering.
Okay.
150 Winnipeggers are being awarded for their contributions in their community, all part of commemorating the city's 150th anniversary. Felicia Adams spoke to one of the awardees.
So this is the second oldest bridge in all of Winnipeg.
Jim Smith did not imagine being awarded by the city for sharing his passion for history.
Totally surprised. I just couldn't believe it.
Smith is the creator of the Northeast Winnipeg Historical Society. The group looks to record and preserve the history of the area, like the Louise Bridge. Would this be sort of the original bridge?
That's the way it would have looked. I guess they have the sailboat, back from this is a drawing from the 1890s, early 1900s. That's the way it would have looked, yes.
And so this would be all wood at the bottom there?
The base of it where the tracks were, that was all a wooden base rather than concrete. Like now it's concrete and that, but no, it was all wood.
The awards celebrate the city's 150th anniversary. The 150 recipients were nominated by people who think they've made an impact. Along with a medal, a tree will also be planted in their name. Among the recipients are Elder Barbara Nippenag, Scott Oak, and Desiree Scott. The mayor, Scott Gillingham, says those who are receiving an award are leaders in their community.
These are people who are, a lot of times are not paid for the work that they do. These are people who give back to the community in a variety of ways.
The Northeast Winnipeg Historical Society was created 16 years ago and since then has gained thousands in followers. Its creation stemming from a lack of information specific to the area.
I decided I would do my own research. If I wanted to know more, then we're going to City Winnipeg archives, old newspapers, and just finding out the stuff myself, which I've published, which I've printed online.
Smith's work attempts to preserve stories that would otherwise be forgotten, like the old East Kildonan City Hall, constructed in 1951, which became a senior center, and this home on Winterton Avenue, built in 1902, where the mayor and the council of East Kildonan once sat.
I look upon, if I'm going to be remembered after I'm gone, or people know of me, it's because of my history work.
Getting recognized for that work adds another chapter to the story. Felicia Adam, CBC News, Winnipeg.
This is it. This is the line that separates Canada from the United States. For years, illegal crossings have been a big problem here. The U.S. Border Patrol and RCMP taking a rare step in talking about surveillance and the equipment they're using, showing off equipment like this scope truck that can see up to 16 kilometers, along with boats, drones, snowmobiles, an attempt to deter people who want to cross illegally.
Our goal as for the integrated border enforcement side in the RCMP is to make sure we want to know who's coming into Canada and what threat they may pose.
In 2022, the Patel family, a young family of 4 from India, froze to death trying to cross from Manitoba into Minnesota. In 2016, 2 other men lost their fingers and nearly froze to death trying to cross from the U.S. into Canada. Now, crossings here spiked in 2018 when then President Trump spoke widely about deporting illegal immigrants. Rhetoric that has returned to U.S. politics with an election booming, both candidates talking about cracking down on illegal immigration.
We have a job to do, and we're going to enforce the law at the border. We're going to enforce border security.
Now, it's not clear whether politics will drive another surge of migrants here, but there are smuggling rings active on both sides of the border with people crossing both ways. The message here, there are eyes on this line. Still, crossing it illegally can be deadly. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News on the Canada-US border at Emerson, Manitoba.
Andrew Marquis is best known as the developer of the Parker lands in Winnipeg. Between 2020 and 2023, he worked as a consultant and advisor for Peguis First Nation, working on a debt repayment plan, consulting on housing shortages related to flooding, and using treaty land entitlement funds to purchase real estate assets. In a statement of claim filed on September 27th, Peguis alleges Marquis, companies he controls, and a company owned by his wife failed to act in the best interests of the band and benefited financially from breaches of duty. In the claim, Peguis alleges Marquis has consistently misused his power and discretion as a fiduciary to enrich himself to the detriment of Peguis. According to the claim, Marquis had the Peguis First Nation Real Estate Trust purchase this former golf course in East St. Paul because he was interested in developing it into housing, according to the claim. Peguis claims Marquis directed the real estate trust to agree to a $5.5 million loan from a company owned by Marquis's wife. That loan now has an interest rate of 9.2%, according to the claim. Peguis also claims Marquis directed the real estate trust to buy and sell this vacant land along Wellington Crescent in Winnipeg. According to the claim, the province sold this land to Peguis on the basis it would be added to its reserve lands. Peguis claims a subsequent sale to a private developer breached the terms of the purchase and the treaty land entitlement agreement. In the claim, Peguis alleges Marquis had the ability to unilaterally exercise his power and discretion in a manner that affected Peguis's legal, economic, and practical interests. Peguis was vulnerable to and at the mercy of Marquis's exercises of discretion and power. In a statement, Marquis called the claim baseless, without merit, and legally flawed. The notion that I, or anyone else for that matter, had total control of all of Peguis's financial, legal, and other matters is pure fiction. Marquis called the claim an attempt by Peguis to distract from its inability to resolve a $172 million lawsuit from a receiver for a former lender and a federal court challenge of its 2023 election launched by former Chief Glenn Hudson against current Chief Stan Bird. None of the allegations made by Peguis have been proven in court. No statement of defense has been filed. Marquis says he will immediately move towards striking the claims. Bart Lekivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, it is time for our monthly interview with Mayor Scott Gillingham, who is in studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Marcy.
So let's start actually with something in the news this morning. I know you did respond to this yesterday, but this new provincial legislation that's going to make it tougher to overrule city land use decisions. So for the sake of our listeners who might have missed the story, what it basically means is if you want to trigger a hearing about something that's being developed, you before needed 25 signatures in the city of Winnipeg, that is, and now that increases to 300 signatures. I know that you've commented that this could speed up developments that are important developments and housing developments in some cases as well. Is that the main reason why you're applauding this?
I am. Currently, before this legislation, yes, 25 signatures was all that was needed to take a decision that council had made to take that to the municipal board. That's a very low threshold. And so there were many projects that council had approved that the public, through 25 signatures, took to the municipal board. What that did is it really slowed things down because the municipal board then has this lineup of hearings and appeals that they need to hear. And in the meantime, we need development to happen. We need more housing. And so this is a good decision, I believe, by the province of Manitoba, and I really support them changing the threshold from 25 to 300 signatures. So the public will still have the opportunity to appeal. They just need 300 signatures to get something to the municipal board instead of 25.
Of course, there's multiple perspectives on this. So to look at it from the other point of view, there may be someone listening saying, but in my block of Winnipeg, this development's going to affect me and my neighbors. There are 25 of us. So they may feel it's unfair, that they need 300 signatures. Now they may be thinking, now what do I do? Do I have to campaign sort of street to street to street if I have a concern about something? What would you say to that concern?
In some cases, yes, people are going to need to go further to get more signatures. But for example, when I was a city councillor in my last term, there was a project with about 150 to close to 200 units that were proposed. I believed it was a very good project. That project was overturned by the municipal board, and it was 25, 30 people that overturned that project. And at the time, there was no requirement for those people to live in the area either. And so there's still an appeal process. Things can still go to the municipal board. It just takes more signatures to get there.
I want to read you something here. This is on another story. This is a quote. The quote is, a working group is set to start as early as next month to plan to move rail lines out of the city of Winnipeg. The group, which will include Canadian Pacific Railway and Canadian national officials, will put together a detailed study to submit to federal officials